All right, so today you're going deep into a world that I think a lot of people, maybe they don't think about too much.
It's pretty invisible to most of us, right?
Yeah, until something goes wrong.
Exactly.
We're talking about trucking, and specifically what it's really like to be a trucker right now.
Yeah, the lives of these drivers, it's a tough job.
Yeah, and to really get into it, we're looking at this interview with a YouTuber. He calls himself Trucking Pays the Bills.
Catchy title, right?
Yeah.
Gets right to the point.
And he makes these videos, how-to stuff, aimed at other truckers.
Sharing tips and advice.
But he also doesn't shy away from the hard stuff, like the challenges, the things people don't always see.
This is definitely not a romanticized view of trucking. He's really laying it all out there.
Yeah, and that's what I thought was so interesting. He goes beyond just long hours on the road.
Right, which is, that's tough enough as it is.
Exactly.
But there's a lot more to it.
Like the pay. He talks about how low the pay can be. And he doesn't just kind of say it. He connects it back to things like deregulation back in the 80s.
That's a key point.
How that created more competition and drove wages down.
Supply and demand. Really.
And then on top of that, fuel costs.
They've been all over the place lately, but generally trending upwards.
So you're squeezed from both sides.
And he gets into the day-to-day, too. Like, just try to picture this. You've been driving for hours. You're exhausted.
Need a break. Legally, you need a break.
Exactly, for safety. But you get to the truck stop, and there's just not enough parking.
You see this all the time on the news and stuff. Trucks parked on the side of the road.
And it's not always because they're trying to be difficult. Sometimes they literally have nowhere else to go.
And if you get caught parking illegally,
hefty fines.
So you're tired, but you're also worried about getting fined. It just adds another layer of stress to an already stressful job.
Absolutely, and the whole thing can have a real impact on your mental health.
Yeah.
Being away from your family for so long.
That was another thing that struck me, the emotional side of it.
It's tough on relationships, missing birthdays, anniversaries, school plays. That stuff adds up.
Yeah, it's a real sacrifice. And then you think about, the image we often have of truckers.
Yeah, this sort of romanticized image of the open road.
Freedom and all that.
Which I'm sure there are elements of that, right? But the reality is much grittier.
Much more complicated. And this YouTuber, he really drives that home. He's like, look, we're essential to this whole economy. Everything moves because of us, but
we're treated as invisible.
Yeah, undervalued, even by the shippers and receivers they're dealing with every day.
The people who rely on them to get the job done.
And it's like, why? How did this happen?
Well, he argues it's systemic, decades of deregulation. It's shifted the power in the industry.
Away from the drivers.
So they have less bargaining power and less ability to, demand better conditions.
And then he brings up something kind of surprising. Electronic logging devices, ELDs.
They're supposed to improve safety.
Make sure drivers aren't pushing themselves too far.
But sometimes it can have the opposite effect. Creates more pressure to drive when they shouldn't to meet deadlines.
Because you can't fudge the logs anymore.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It is. Shows how complex these problems are. But then that's where this whole community aspect comes in.
Yeah, this is the bright spot.
The YouTuber, he's using his platform to share knowledge, help other drivers.
Like a peer support network, but online.
Exactly. He's got tutorials, practical stuff.
Empowering them.
And it makes me think, technology sometimes gets blamed for some of these problems.
Right. It's easy to point the finger at technology.
But it can also be a tool to fight back. To connect people.
Give them a voice.
Have you ever thought about that? How much online communities change things?
Oh, for sure. Especially for groups who might feel isolated otherwise.
In this case, truckers out there on the road. Now they can come together online, share their experiences, organize.
Rich for change.
And that's exactly what this YouTuber is calling for.
Yeah.
Better pay, more respect, better infrastructure.
Like more parking spaces. Seems like a basic need.
But it all ties back to the bigger issues, right?
Yeah, it's all connected.
Like if there were more parking spaces, drivers wouldn't be so pressured to drive when they're tired.
Which makes everyone safer.
So it's in everyone's best interest to make these changes. And that's what I think is so important for listeners to take away from this.
It's about awareness. We all benefit from the work these drivers do.
But we got to understand the challenges they face and do what we can to support them.
There are organizations out there fighting for truckers' rights.
Supporting those organizations, pushing for better policies.
Even just being aware of the issues, that's a start.
It's a reminder that our everyday choices, they have an impact. And thinking about the future, with all this talk about automation, self-driving trucks.
What happens to these drivers then?
It's a big unknown. Could make things better, could make things worse.
It's a conversation we need to be having.
So this whole deep dive, it's really just the beginning.
A lot to think about.
The trucking industry, it's way more complex than I think most people realize. And it's crucial to our lives.
Absolutely.
So we need to pay attention, understand the challenges, and work towards solutions.
For the sake of the drivers, and for everyone, really.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me on this one. I think it's going to be a real eye-opener for a lot of our listeners.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.
And for everyone listening, keep those wheels turning, but do it safely out there. And remember, the next time you see a truck on the road, think about the person behind the wheel. They're the ones keeping our world moving.